Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today we're going to get the new year off to a flying start with this Messerschmitt BF109 E3 in 1/48th scale by Tamiya. I feel like it's been a while since I've done an aircraft, and I don't think I've ever built one by Tamiya, but I do hear good things. I've had this one sitting around for a while, so why not build it? I'm not at all surprised to see that there is nothing on the back of the box. The sides do have some examples of colour schemes, which is nice, but the interesting stuff is inside the box, so let's have a look at that. There are two grey plastic sprues which, unsurprisingly, are of good quality and are rather neatly moulded. Tamiya might not make the most hyper-detailed models around, but they are consistently good, at least in my experience. I'm yet to be disappointed by their quality. There is also a single clear sprue for the canopy. This is also good looking, but a bit challenging to video nicely. I'm no plane expert by any standard, so I can't say how accurate any of these parts are, and to be fair, I'm not that worried about extreme accuracy to begin with, but what I can tell you is that these parts look quite good. Like I said before, they're neatly moulded and crisp looking. There are mould lines, and that shouldn't surprise anyone. They're always there to some degree. They are quite minor on this kit and should be very easy to clean up. Most of them should easily be removed with a light swipe from a fine sanding stick. Just how I like my mould lines, almost non-existent. Some of them are a bit heavier, but easy enough to deal with. If I'm honest, I thought there would be more parts in this kit. It's a fairly big model, though not huge or anything, so I'm kind of surprised to see that there aren't a load of little tiny bits. Not that I'm complaining, just observing. I don't really have a whole lot of experience with plane kits, so my expectations might be a little bit off. It looks like this kit has a couple of different options. There are 3 propeller caps I can see, and I'm confident we don't need all 3 on this one plane. It looks to me like all of these parts should go together quite easily. It should be a fun build. The clear parts also look quite good. They seem to be free of mould lines, which is nice. You could easily make a mess cleaning mould lines off of parts that should be see-through. The decals included with this kit seem decent. There's a bunch of markings you could use, including some intact swastikas for the whiny babies that get upset when there aren't any. You could model a few different specific planes with all of these markings, which is nice. Unsurprisingly, an instruction sheet is also included. The instructions themselves are good. They're easy to understand and follow, though I don't really enjoy this kind of fold-out style and would prefer a booklet, but this will work just fine. There are painting and marking guides at the end, though if you want to use anything other than Tamiya's paints, you'll have to figure out the equivalent colours yourself. There's also a sheet with some additional paint schemes you could try. Let's begin. The first step in this build is to assemble the cockpit. Cock. I take the base part of the cockpit and attach this under-seat bit. I've no idea what it's called. What matters is it goes into place quite easily with the handle thing protruding from the part on the left side facing forwards. I then glue the stick in. Is there another name for this? Joystick? I don't know. I'm pretty sure I put this the right way around with the sort of bend in the stick facing forwards. Then comes this bit with the foot pedals. This is pretty easy to position and looks fairly good, though it probably won't be seen at all when the model is complete. I then add the pilot's seat. I nudge it a tiny bit, but it was pretty much already in a satisfactory position. Very seaty. The instructions say to add the pilot now, but I might build this plane without him. I've not yet decided at this point. Next, I assemble the forward part of the cockpit. This mainly involves gluing this instrument panel onto this bigger part. There are guide pins to ensure you get this on nice and neat. Then there's this clear part that goes in the top of the control panel here. I'm pretty sure this is a gun sight and most of it will need to be painted later. I then glue that assembly onto the front of the seat assembly I just built. This is made easy by the guide pins and corresponding holes. Looks pretty decent. A lot of people, including the instructions, suggest painting these assemblies before putting the rest of the plane together, though I would prefer to paint it all at once, so that's what I'll be doing. Most of the interior won't be visible anyway, so I don't believe it needs detailed painting. Your mileage may vary, so do your models however you want. I then install this wheelie thing into the left side of the fuselage. I don't know what it does, but it sure is easy to position. So is this thing. Again, I'm not sure what it is, which is probably a huge surprise to all of you. Once those parts have set, I glue the cockpit into one side of the fuselage, the right side. No reason for that side, I just picked that part up first. Then I test fit the two halves of the fuselage together and check to see if the pilot can be added and removed easily. Turns out he can, so I'll paint him separately, which means I can get away with putting even less detail into painting the interior of the cockpit. Then I glue both halves of the plane together. I do this in sections in an effort to eliminate any messes with the glue and to help minimize the chance of gaps or misaligned parts. It goes together fairly nicely. I did touch up some areas with a sanding stick, and there are some areas I might revisit before priming and painting, but all in all it's a very nice fit. Then it's time to attach the exhausty bits. These are simple enough to install. They go into these slots here on either side of the plane like so. The end with the smaller jagged shape to it should be at the front of the plane. Otherwise the exhausts would be in backwards and that would just be silly, wouldn't it? Then comes this part, which I assume is an air intake of some kind. This part drops into place very easily. You would have to work at it to do it wrong. I think it looks decent enough, though some might not approve of the minor gap around this part, especially at the bottom. It is now time for wing assembly. These come as 3 parts. After a minor tidy up and a test fitting, I glue the upper wings onto the lower section. Again, like the fuselage, I do them in sections, starting with the outer part of the wing. This is just to make things a bit easier and to reduce the chance of messing things up. The parts fit together very nicely and are guided by a couple of guide pins and their corresponding mounting holes. Guided by guide pins, you don't say. There's nothing too tricky here, though do pay attention to the joins. It's best to avoid gaps and overlapping bits here while you can do something about it rather than having to fix them later. Either way, this is pretty simple. When both upper wing parts are attached, we have a nice solid part. I have ended up with some very minor gaps, but they will be easy enough to fix later. Now it's time to join the wings to the fuselage. The wing assembly slots into place here, right where you might expect it to go. I apply glue everywhere parts contact each other and then apply pressure to try and minimize gaps. The fit isn't absolutely perfect, but it is okay. Some of the gaps might need to be filled, maybe not, I'll decide that later. Then I glue in this pair of machine guns. This part is much nicer than what I imagine trying to install 2 tiny little fiddly machine gun parts would be. It goes into place nice and easy. Just to be sure, I test fit the engine cowling. I left the guns to set for a while so they wouldn't get knocked out of place, and then I glue the cowling on. It's pretty easy to get this lined up all nice and neat with both guns poking out of their holes. Moving along, it's now time to add the slats and flaps to the wings. I start by attaching this thing to the flap part. This is easy enough. There's keying so it doesn't go around the wrong way or anything crazy like that. Now we must make a decision as to how we want the flaps. They can be in the up position, though that would require the trimming of those mounting tabs. I've decided to model mine down, so I glue those mounting tabs into the slots in the back of the flap recesses in the wing like so. This is pretty easy, though I wasn't sure if I had pushed the part as far forward as it should be. It wouldn't go any further forward though, so I guess I did. Once that's on, it's time for the slats. These have pretty much the same option as the flaps. If you want them retracted, you need to trim off the mounting tabs. I don't know much about planes, but I think if the flaps are down, the slats are also usually out, so I've modelled mine out. The other wing gets the same treatment, though the parts are different, so do make sure that you're using the correct parts for either side of the plane. It seems I skipped ahead in the instructions a bit at some point and missed the rudder and horizontal stabilizers. The rudder slots into place nicely at the rear here. You could modify it so that it's turning, but I'm happy for it to be straight ahead. It goes into place easily and fits quite nicely. Then I glue the horizontal stabilizers on. The part slots into place easily enough, though there is a fair bit of play in it. Good thing there are these little support bar things. These hold the little wing in place nicely. No sagging or misaligned stabilizers on this plane. It looks pretty decent, it just needs a tail wheel, but we'll do that later. Now it's time to build a sub-assembly for the bottom part of the engine cowling. First, I slot this little venty flappy bit into the larger cowling part, and then I add glue to the inside, mostly because it would be really hard to add glue from the outside. Then comes this little rectangular box thing with some grill details on it. Once that's in place, I add glue, again from the inside. The final part is this longer flappy covery thing. That is the technical term, by the way. All of these parts go into place nice and easily, and the result is a part that is much better detailed than it would have been were it all moulded as one piece. That assembly can then be glued into the big gaping space on the underside of the engine area. There isn't really anything to lock it into place as such, but you should easily be able to tell when it's right. Now it's time for the landing gear. I ummed and ahed for a bit, but I've decided that I want to build this plane as landed, or at least with its gear down. I clip out the pieces for one landing gear at a time to avoid getting the parts for either side of the plane all mixed up, because that would be annoying. The landing gear is pretty easy to build. The strut joins onto the cover bit, whatever that's called, with a tab to guide it. There is a little bit of play in it, but it's not too hard to position correctly. I then glue the tyre and wheel rim parts together, and then I glue the assembled wheel onto the obvious location on the strut. It might be fairly easy to get these on facing slightly to either side, so do be careful of that. I think I got them on reasonably straight. While I let the landing gears sit and bond properly, I add I guess these are air intakes? Or radiators? Whatever they are, it's simple to install these two flat bits. The rear one has a pair of guideposts that slot into the recesses on their mounting point. Very easy. Then we cover them up with these little cowling things. These are different for either side of the plane, so do be sure to use the correct parts. You would probably have trouble putting them on wrong anyway, owing to the little round cutout that goes on the outer side. Next, I install the landing gear. There are some very convenient mounting points for these right where you would expect them. There's a little bit of play in the right landing gear, which isn't too bad, it stayed pretty much where I wanted it, but it is a little bit worse on the left one. It just wants to keep flopping over, which is a bit annoying. I wish these connection points were a tighter fit so that I could be sure my landing gear was on properly. I think I did get it close enough though. The tail wheel is part of the landing gear too, so let's install that. We don't want the plane dragging its tail along the ground now, do we? This easily slots into place here, though I feel like maybe it should be up a little bit higher, but that was as far as it would go. Now it's time for some little sensor doohickeys that go on the underside of the wing here. I think the first one is a pitot tube. It's a little bit fiddly, but not too hard to get into place. It's got a half circle keying, so you can't put it on backwards. A little bit of nudging until it looks right and it's done. Then come two little bulby things on the end of a mounting pole that go towards the rear of the wing. These were pretty simple to put into their mounting holes, though tweezers might have helped. They were a bit more fiddly to actually get into a position that looked nice and straight. From some angles they look weird and wrong, while from other angles they look right. I think I got them on okay in the end. It is now propeller time. It's not like hammer time, you don't have to stop or anything like that. I glue the propeller into the base part like so. There's keying, so it will only go together one way unless you absolutely insist on doing it wrong. There are three choices for the propeller cap. I've chosen this one because I think it looks cool. I'm sure someone will have an issue with this choice, but they should keep it to themselves. Nobody cares. The cap goes into place quite easily too. It's keyed just like the propeller, which helps get the space between the cap and the ends of the propellers just right. There is a poly cap that could go in here, which I didn't show earlier because I missed them. I think that would be more useful if you were wanting to have the propeller be movable. I'm fine with having mine glued nice and solidly into place. While the glue on that is setting, I'll add this antenna to the rear portion of the canopy. The instructions do say to install that at this point, but that would be kind of silly, and I'll be leaving it off until the model is painted. But there's no harm in adding the antenna now. Next, I add the machine guns to the wings. There are some obvious mounting holes for these, and they are rather simple to install. I nudge them around a bit until the guns look to be in the center of the mounting holes, and not leaning up against the side anywhere. Very shooty. Then I glued the propeller into place. And of course, because I'm a dunderhead, I forgot to film that, but here you can see that it is in fact glued into place. And it couldn't have got there unless I put it there, so you'll just have to trust me that I did that. Or not, I don't really care. I do think it looks decent enough though. Then I temporarily place the canopy parts over the cockpit. Of course they won't be glued in until the plane is painted, and for that I'll use PVA or something that won't cause fogging in the clear plastic. But for now, the parts will just rest in place. They do actually seem to stay there fairly well. They don't immediately fall off when you handle the model, which is nice. I'm going to have to trim off those tabs on the right side. Those would allow the canopy to be modelled in the open position if you chose to do so. I'm pretty sure mine is going to be closed. Also, I'm not sure if I really want to include the pilot or not, but I'll decide on that later. So, that's the Tamiya BF109 E3 in 1/48th scale completed. I think it has turned out quite well and it looks rather cool. The BF109 isn't quite as sleek looking as some other planes of its era, but it's an attractive and powerful looking machine. The model itself is fairly big. The wingspan is a bit over 200mm. I mean, that's not huge, but it's bigger than any other fighter plane I've built so far. There were a couple of parts not used in this build, like the drop tank you might have seen on the sprue. I don't know enough about the variants of the BF109 to say if they might be added to the E3 or not, but I do like having the extra stuff to add to my bits box, so that's a nice little bonus. The parts that were used in the build were all very neat and went together with no fuss at all. I didn't have to trim or sand anything to get the parts to go together, beyond the removal of mould lines of course, which was very easy. It did actually take me a while to get this kit built, but that was mostly due to interruptions combined with having to film and take notes. I think if you're not making a video about this plane, it could be whipped together in an afternoon. It's not a difficult build at all. If you pay attention to the instructions, everything should go well. I think this is a quite good looking model. It's nicely detailed, though I'm sure it's not good enough for John Q. Rivet Countsman, but for everyone else it should be fairly decent. There are still some areas I might like to hit with some putty, but for now it's looking quite good, and I think it's going to look very nice when it's painted. I'm sure someone will complain that I didn't paint it in this video, but they can shut up and be patient. I think I will actually paint this model soon though. I have a set of Luftwaffe paints that I'd like to try out, and this would certainly be a very good candidate for Luftwaffe colours. If that interests you, keep an eye out, but don't hold your breath. You need to breathe or you'll never see it painted. Anyway, what do you think? Have you built this kit? Do you like BF109s? How would you choose to paint it? Let me know in the comments section below. Also, if you haven't already, why not do all the liking, subscribing and following things here on YouTube, Twitch and my other social media places. And if you really like the things I do, please consider supporting over on Patreon, where you'll now be able to see my videos up to 4 days early, or by purchasing a shirt or mug from my merch store. Links to all of the things I just mentioned are in the description below. And as always, I shall return soon, so until then, be excellent to each other and thanks for watching. Farewell.